Senator Ron Johnson is on the phone, and we're going to talk about a whole bunch of things related to what's going on in Kenosha and around the country. But I wanted to share that information with people, Ron. Welcome to the program. It's good to have you. And the idea that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party have been able to maintain the lie that police are nothing more than a bunch of knuckle-dragging, mouth-breathing racists with badges and guns looking to hunt down black people is so offensive and evil that, that we can't get ahead of it blows my mind.
Well, first of all, hello, Vicki. Heather McDonald's done phenomenal work. I think what is most frustrating to me is when it comes to Black Lives Matter, it's only certain Black Lives Matter, apparently. We held a hearing with the Acting Secretary Wolf of DHS a couple weeks ago, and in my opening statement, I pointed out 8 children that were gunned down in Chicago just since Memorial Day, including a 10-year-old, 7-year-old Natalia Wallace, who was shot in the backyard party, 3-year-old Mikai James, killed when somebody shot at his father's car in traffic, and 1-year-old Sincere Gaston killed when somebody shot at his mother's car. I didn't see protests. I didn't see the Black Lives Matter rally to support and talk about those black lives that were tragically lost in inner cities. Generally inner cities that have been governed by Democrats for decades. Those Black Lives Matters don't count. Apparently the only Black Lives Matter that really count are the ones whose deaths can be exploited into protests, into an insurgency that also evolve into things like riots and loss of other human life.
So let's talk about that, because that is what's going on. These are, the riots in Kenosha were not about Jacob Blake. But to say they're not about Jacob Blake, then you have to ask what they are about. And Joe Biden doesn't want to do any of those things. He doesn't want to say that the riots took place because of Jacob Blake. He doesn't want to say they didn't take place because of Jacob Blake. He doesn't want to have to commit to anything. He wants to claim that he's above it all and he's going to heal America and he's anti-hate, which is bunk, because those were his shock troops. Those were his voters. That was political action. So let's talk about Kenosha, because Kenosha, and anybody who saw any of the riot shots saw that this wasn't a bunch of people, Black Lives Matter folks with nice signs and saying, we want peace and we want police reform. That's not what this was about. This was about trained and organized, largely white, radical leftists who were ready to go, coming in from California, Washington, Chicago, in order to burn down a city. So let's talk about these riots, because this is a rinse-repeat story across the United States. Minneapolis, Chicago, Madison, Kenosha, Seattle, Portland, and the list goes on.
Yeah, Vicki, this is an insurgency. These are anarchists that are just looking for an event that they can exploit to bring their insurgency, bring their anarchy, bring their chaos into another city. And I think what happened in Kenosha, 2 things. First of all, it woke up America. In the past, it's been in the big cities or out on the left coast, and flyover country here. We're kind of saying, well, it'll never happen here. And all of a sudden, here it is on our front doorstep in Kenosha, Wisconsin. But these are outside agitators. The more we learn about this, the more we do find out that the large percentage of people arrested were from different cities, primarily out of state. They came in here in caravans, and the other thing we learned is how to stop it. And it starts with political leadership. It starts with strength. It starts with resolve. And that's exactly what President Trump demonstrated. It's exactly what Governor Evers didn't. So an extra night went on that didn't have to occur. A couple of people probably died because of the lack of resolve, because once Governor Evers accepted the out-of-state National Guardsmen, once the agitators realized there's really not going to be an opening for us here anymore, we're going to be overwhelmed with manpower, we're not going to be able to riot, they picked up stakes and they probably handed out to D.C. to harass the people who went to President Trump's acceptance speech, including people like Senator Rand Paul. So this is an outside insurgency. This is planned. This is coordinated. I don't know who funds it, but that is what I hope the FBI, Department of Homeland Security's investigative arm, and the Department of Justice can determine as quickly as possible and publicize. The American people have a right to know what's going on here. This is not These are just not grassroots protests that are, that's not what this is. This is a planned and coordinated insurgency.
And you are on the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, so you're going to be able to dive into some of this. Obviously, you can't do criminal investigations or those kinds of things, but you can get information if that information is gettable, right? In your committee, I was talking to Ken Cuccinelli yesterday, the acting deputy. Director of Homeland Security. He didn't seem to want to commit to the idea that this is organized, and yet it has to be. It really does. We have now an announcement. There is going to be 50 days of rage in Lafayette Park across from the White House. I mean, these are people who are somehow able to just on a dime show up in D.C., in Kenosha, in Chicago, in Madison. So I'm trying to figure out why it didn't seem like the Deputy Director of Homeland Security had an idea that this had some organization component to it.
Well, my guess is they want to be ultra careful until they actually have the evidence, until they can display that evidence in a court of law. They are somewhat hesitant because it's still uncertain. We really don't know. It's part of the problem with this is it's hard when you arrest these people. First of all, what do you arrest them for? For holding gasoline in a can? That's not a crime. And they're clamming up. They're obviously they have their Miranda rights read to them, so they're not saying anything. And so it's hard to get to the bottom of this. It's hard to put your finger on exactly what is happening. But to me, it's quite obvious when you're pre-positioning riot gear, the cement milkshakes, frozen water bottles, industrial grade fireworks, other accelerants and arson equipment. And by the way, you can't continue to riot for 100 days without having some kind of financial support. Now, possibly some of our unemployment insurance in the CARE Act might be funding some of these people. The unemployment insurance, they don't have to work, but they still get a check. I don't know to what extent the individuals are being funded, but we also found out, I think some of these protesters and rioters were staying at some pretty swanky hotels in Washington, D.C. So again, there's a certain level of grassroots to this, no doubt about it, but there's a certain level, I think a very large level of coordinated, organized, outside agitators. And again, they're just exploiting different situations.
Yeah, and what I'd like to see is someone take it seriously enough to do the investigation. Is the FBI doing the investigation into whether this is a coordinated effort that is managed, either strictly or loosely by national orgs, or sort of in the same way terrorist cells are organized, where there's only a very, very loose sort of centralized structure, and then it's sort of allowed to be more amorphous at the ground level, which is what made it so hard for us to find terrorists for such a long time. Is the FBI taking this issue, the idea of organization, seriously? Because they can show up on a dime. I don't care if it's Green Bay or Kenosha. I mean, just suddenly, bam, it's there. And I the reason I'm asking you this, it seems like President Trump gets this and AG Barr gets this because ahead of those riots, they were ready to go with additional National Guard support from other states, with federal agent support. Tony Evers, while he was pouring gasoline on the soon-to-be lit fires, said no. But ahead of the first firebomb being thrown, President Trump and AG Barr said that they were ready to go with support for Wisconsin. So it seems like someone knows that something's going on that has an organizational component to it.
Well, first of all, you can maybe excuse the mayor of Minneapolis for the first night of protests when you really didn't know what was going to happen. But now that we have such a pattern established, I mean, shame on any elected official where one of these instances occur that you immediately have an indication, okay, this is going to be one of the ones that's going to be exploited. You better man up real fast. I mean, you better get the manpower on the streets of those particular cities and don't ever allow the protests to build and devolve into a riot. But again, it's hard to investigate this. It's hard to prove it. But from my standpoint, it seems quite obvious there is something organized occurring here, and we need to get to the bottom of it. And I for one, am very appreciative of the fact that President Trump came in here. First of all, I was concerned about Kenosha. It's being able to recover and heal from this. Thank law enforcement, support law enforcement, but also call a spade a spade. He said it's domestic terror, and that's what's occurring here. This is domestic terrorism. You take a look at how these Antifa protesters, rioters are dressed. They're not dressed to provide comfort. They are dressed to actually commit terror and engage in terror.
They're not dressed to protest, right? They're not dressed to march. They're dressed to throw bombs. One of the other things that we learned about Kenosha as well is that they were mixing bleach and ammonia in bottles and throwing those so that, of course, when they exploded, chlorine gas was released. That's another. I mean, that is not protest. Ron Johnson, as always, thank you for coming on the program today.
Have a great day.
You too.